Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Today we're going to do the Cambridge Syllabus 9626 and we're going to be talking about graphics today. Today is the open source version. We're going to be using Inkscape and Gimp. Inkscape and Gimp are both really good softwares and they are able to cover everything we need to know in the syllabus. I've had a look at both the syllabus up to 24 and the syllabus up to 27. This is version 2, by the way. And it covers everything we need to know in both syllabi. As usual, I have made a checklist I have converted each of the requirements in the syllabus to a checklist. In this case, I have a checklist for Inkscape and a checklist for Gimp. If you're interested in doing the Adobe Photoshop version, that's okay too. I'm going to make a video about that later. But very quickly, before we get started, I'm going to talk very quickly about whether you should choose Inkscape and Gimp to study or choose Photoshop. Well, in my opinion, Inkscape and Gimp are much better because they're completely free and open source. They're almost as good as Adobe Photoshop. I say almost, but if you consider the fact that it's free and open source, it's actually better. Learning Inkscape and Gimp is free, and Inkscape and Gimp, once you know them, learning Adobe Photoshop will be super easy. And another advantage of using free and open source is that students are able to practice this stuff at home. So it's really easy to install and you don't have to pay anything and you can practice at home as much as you want. And you don't have to rely on the school computers to practice for homework and for self-study. However, you have to be aware that when it comes to something to put on your CV, Photoshop actually looks better. Inkscape and Gimp, okay, they're fine on your CV, but Photoshop is something that recruiters are looking for. It's not that impressive to say I know Inkscape and Gimp, but purely from the point of view of passing the exam, I recommend Inkscape and Gimp because it's free. Okay, let's start Inkscape and Gimp. First, we're going to start with Inkscape. So let's have a look at the checklist. We're going to walk through all of this. We need to know all these points in both Inkscape and Gimp. And then we're going to talk about these points which are relevant for Inkscape only. Layers. Let's start with layers. You know what? That doesn't make sense. Let's start with drawing simple objects. Basic tools. So once you start Inkscape, we see we have a toolbar over here which has all sorts of tools. We have this usual menu up here and we have another toolbar with a whole bunch of icons in the top. The interesting thing is, depending on which tool I have chosen here, the icons up here change. Furthermore, I have a toolbar on the right hand side. Let's start with a very simple tool called the rectangle tool. When you want to draw a rectangle, you just click and drag and it draws a rectangle. I have a red and black rectangle with rounded corners. Probably you have something else, that doesn't matter. Let's have a look at how to change those things. So let's go up to the Edit Paths by Nodes tools. And now we see that we have this two squares, and I can shift around the two squares to change the location of the corners. And I also have these circles, and these circles to control how much rounding we have. Down here we can change the color of the fill if we want. And if we click here on stroke, automatically a thing pops up and we can change the color of the stroke I'm on RGB, we're going to talk about that later, but usually I prefer to be on HSL. We're going to talk about what that means a bit later. We can also change the fill over here. So if this stroke, if you don't have this, another way to open it is down here in this toolbar and click on this icon. Or if you can't find it, you click on this triangle and you'll find stroke and fill. Edit stroke and fill dialog. And here we can change the color of the fill, and we can also change the stroke, which is the border, the color of the border. We can also click here and change the stroke style to dots, or and the width. Oh, I can't really see it like that. Yeah, okay. Anyway, I recommend that you follow along with me and try it out because you'll remember much easier. It will be much easier to remember if you actually try it out. So we have a rectangle. We learned about drawing a rectangle, and we can use the node editor to change the specific features of the rectangle. If we go back to the rectangle tool, we can say, we see up here that we can change the width and the height. We can type it in precisely. Right now we're in millimeters, but we can shift that, change to pixels as well, or centimeters or inches, or whatever you prefer. I'm going to go back to millimeters, and we're going to make a square by setting the width and the height the same. Incidentally, if you hold down Control, it constrains the motion of the mouse. If you hold down Shift, it grows it in both directions. Okay, we also have the selection tool, and with the selection tool we can select different objects. I'm going to delete one by pressing delete. We have a circle, stroke ellipse, we draw it, set the stroke, set the fill. You can also set the opacity here. A means is short for opacity, and now I'm going to draw two of them. And it's fully opaque like that, and it's transparent like that. What else? We have all these shapes that we can draw, either stars or polygons. Up here we can set the number of corners. Let's say 5-sided polygon. We can always change it later. We can also make it rounded. It looks quite interesting. It's fun to play with, right? Let's put it back to 0. And we can also randomize it a bit. So it's an irregular polygon. We also have stars. And also with stars we can increase or decrease the number of corners. And we can also increase and decrease this ratio. So we can very easily make fun shapes. Okay, what else was there? We also have spirals. Spirals, we can change the number of turns. And the divergence. and the inner radius and the outer radius. These are pretty straightforward tools. And we also have freehand tool. Let's use the freehand tool. You can scribble with the freehand tool. Then we can use the selection tool to move it if we want. Also, when it comes to the freehand tool, we can go to the edit path by nodes. And you see we have a lot of nodes and we can move these nodes individually. We're going to learn more about that. But first I want to talk about the Bezier curve tool. The Bezier curve, you just click, 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 click to draw straight lines. And when you're done, you just press enter. Now let's see what happens when we fill this one. It feels like that. We can also remove the stroke and it looks like a regular polygon. Also with the Bezier curve, if you go like this, you can fill up, you can complete the shape, and then it automatically makes a looped shape. Now, one thing about the Bezier curve is if I click like that, I have one straight line. If I click and then click and drag, it makes a curve instead of a straight line. And then I can click and drag again to make another curve. And then if I want a corner, I just click one time and move to the next shape. So it's quite useful for making weird shapes. But once, if you've already got your Bezier curve down and you want to edit it at a later stage, what you can do is you can go to the node, the edit paths by node. And I can see all these nodes here. If we click on one of the paths connecting two nodes and drag, it turns it to a curve. And these here are direction handles. So we can move these direction handles around and create any kind of weird shape that we want. As a shortcut, if you hold down Control and click on any one of these nodes, it changes the type of node it is. And we've got 4 types of nodes. We've got corner nodes. So let's turn this into a corner node. And as you can see, the corner node, as you can see, the corner node is not necessarily smooth. It might be smooth, but these direction nodes can be facing in any direction. But let's see what happens when I change it to a smooth node. In this case, these direction handles are forced to be parallel. So it's always going to be smooth no matter what. This is actually an asymmetric node. So we have the next one, which is symmetric. So not only are they parallel, but they're also the exact same size. And finally, we have auto smooth. Auto smooth, I don't know exactly what it does, but oftentimes if I select all the nodes at once by clicking and dragging, click on auto smooth, it gets a pretty nice smooth. So it's a good shortcut. Okay, let's see, what else do we have? We can add nodes. I'm gonna select this node and I'm gonna hold down Shift and select this node. I'm gonna click on this plus, and it adds a node right in between. So we can move this up and down. We can also remove nodes. I select the node I want to remove and click on minus. Generally, it's a good idea to have not too many nodes. We can also merge two nodes together if we want, which is this one. I'm going to press Ctrl Z. And we can also split the path apart at the selected node. So now I have this node selected and split the path apart. And now I have two paths. I'm going to join these two nodes again using this. It recreates this line between, it creates this line between the two nodes. Or if I want to remove it again, use this one. So it removed this line. Okay, I think that's all we need to know about the Bezier curve for now. Remember, it's quite a lot in one go, and you don't necessarily learn this just by watching me, so you have to practice as well. Rectangles, ellipses, circles. Oh, we didn't learn about arcs. Let's do that. Stars though, polygons, spirals, arcs. So to create an arc is where this is, okay, this is basically an arc, but I'd rather call it a curve. An arc is more like part of an ellipse or part of a circle. So let's draw a circle. And now we have the radius, which we can change up here. But we also have the start and the end positions, which we can change. And it draws an arc here, like that, part of this ellipse. As you can see, it currently draws these parts as well. If you want to get rid of that, you can just click here and only this part of the stroke will be drawn. Or we can do it like that, as opposed to like that. Or this last one just means get rid of the arc. It's pretty fun to play around with. Okay, that is everything for the basic tools. Now let's go back to the top and talk about layers. Over here we should have the layers dialog. By the way, if ever you cannot find any of them, they're all up here as well. So layer will be found by finding layers and objects. Fill and stroke dialog you find up here. And you should also be able to find them here as well. Layers and objects. We have currently got one layer. We can, or let's make a new layer. So I'm going to right click on the layer and add layer. Add. So I've got two layers. Now while I have layer 2 selected, I'm going to draw another shape. And I can hide this layer. Or I could hide this layer. Another thing we can do is we can lock the layers. So if I'm working on layer 2 and drawing over here and editing this, there's no risk that I'll accidentally click on this one and added that one by mistake. It's very useful. You see, I can't even select it using the selection tool. Now we can just move around and edit this layer without worrying about editing the other layer. You get it. Okay. That was hiding. We can also change the order of the layer. Hold on, let me just make this thing opaque. That was here, fully opaque, so that I can better see what's happening. We can hide the layer. We can move the layer below just by clicking and dragging. And now it's hidden behind this layer. In fact, let me make this also fully opaque. And let's change this color. Okay. So we can click and drag to put layer 2 in the front, in the foreground, or we can click and drag to put layer 1 in the foreground. We can also use these arrows if you don't like clicking and dragging. Also, I can click and drag and put layer 1 into layer 2. It's still in the foreground, but it's now a subset of layer 2, and if I hide layer 2, it's also going to hide layer 1. Furthermore, if we get confused, we can switch to layers only view. And we can see each individual object as though it was a layer. So each object can be in the foreground or in the background compared to other objects. So for example, let's move this one here. I can put it into the background by moving it down. Or I could put it into the foreground by moving it up. Right? These objects have weird path names, but these are individual objects really. Okay. But usually I prefer to work like this. But sometimes it can be helpful to see each individual object. Okay, let's have a look at the thing. We've got add layers. Oh, we didn't remove layers, but we changed the order, hide and lock, blend, flatten, merge. Okay, we can, let's see. To remove a layer, right click, delete layer. And the controls of that. In Inkscape, to merge two layers, basically the easiest thing you can do is just drag it into the layer. So now these two layers are merged. But another thing you could do, let me just press Ctrl Z, is we go back to this view and we'll just select all the objects inside this layer and click and drag it into layer 2. And then we can just remove layer 1. That merges layers. Okay. Flatten just means merge all the layers into one. And now we want to talk about opacity and blend. Let me just Ctrl Z that so that we still have two layers again. And let's move layer 1 to the top. And we can change, we've already seen about changing the opacity of individual objects, but we can change the opacity of entire layers. And in order to do that, we can use this over here. Okay, let's set it back to fully opaque. Both layer 1 and layer 2. And then let's talk about blend modes. So blend modes is a bit similar to opacity, but a bit different. So it's a bit like when you have a blend mode, it influences the layers below. So it's not just covering the layer below, but it influences the layer below. With opacity, if it's slightly transparent, you can still see the layer below, but it's like the light is being filtered. And blend modes, it's a bit similar, but it's filtered in a different, unpredictable kind of way. Let's see, to apply it, you just select the entire layer. You want to give a blend mode, and then we're going to go to the fill and stroke dialog, and down here under fill, we can change the blend mode to multiply, which darkens the layer below. Screen, which lightens the layer below. And then we've got darken again. Lighten is basically the same, but the precise calculations are slightly different. Overlay, don't worry about what that is. And then we've got all sorts of different things. But I'm not going to go into the technicalities of what each of these things mean. But just suffice to say, you've got all sorts of blending modes. 99.9% of the time we'll be doing normal. Okay. Let's move on. So that covers blend modes and opacity. And let's talk about transforming. So here we have a selection tool. We can select different objects. And we can hold down Shift to select multiple objects. But whether we have one or multiple objects selected, we can also use the selection tool to transform them. There's different transformations we can do. We can stretch it horizontally. We can stretch it vertically. We can stretch it both horizontally and vertically. And we can also hold down hold down Control to make sure that the stretching stays constant. So that this ratio between the width and the height stays constant. And then we can also hold down Shift, so it stretches it around the center point. Incidentally, we can also move this center point by clicking on it. And okay, sorry, let me start again. We select it once, and if you select it once, we get arrows like this. If we click on it again, we get this. And now we can move the center point. Also, once we've got these arrows, we can skew it and we can rotate it. So click to get to this mode, rotate. I can also change the center of rotation to up there, or the center of skewing to up there. And then you click it on third time. I actually don't know what this does, to be honest. Anyway, it's not in the syllabus, so we don't need to know. Okay, let's see. I think that's all the transformations we need to know. Resize, skew, reflect we didn't do. Rotate we did. Move we already know. Scale is the same as resize. Shear. Let's quickly talk about reflection. I showed you this using just a mouse, but if you want to be precise and set the exact x coordinates, like for example 0, 0, then we can also set the exact width and the exact height using these numbers over here. Here's a reflect. This is a mirror. Mirror horizontally, mirror vertically. Moving the center of rotation back there. Also, we got the rotate by 90 degrees. And that's all. We also have envelope and perspective, but we're going to do that a little bit later. I want to talk about some other things first. Okay. Let's go to group and ungroup. So different objects, how they react with one another. Here we have two different objects. And when I select one, it selects one, and then when I select the other, it selects the other. I can't join them together in one group, so I'm going to just hold down Shift. And why not? Let's join this one too. And I can join them together in one group by pressing Ctrl G. Or if you prefer, you can go Objects, Group. And now they're all one object. And we can click and move it around. If I want to edit this group, we can double click and then we can move individual objects around in the group. But be careful, because now if we look down here, we see G9373. That's because we're editing group with the number 9373. So to go back to the layer we were working on, we double click somewhere in this empty space. And we're back in layer 1. And now we can go back to grouping it. So this could cause some confusion sometimes, so be careful not to get confused. Double click. Anyway, if you do get confused, Ctrl Z is usually the answer. Just press Ctrl Z until you get back to a stage where you're not confused anymore. Okay. If you want to, you're tired of these being grouped, you can ungroup them, Ctrl U, and then back to individual. They're individual things. You can go find that too over here. I press Ctrl U, you can press Shift Ctrl G, or you can use this ungroup thing. Let's see if that actually works. Ctrl G, Ctrl Shift G. Yeah, that works too. Okay. Group ungroup. Let's rename that. Like that. Okay, join, add, subtract, intersect. Here I have two different objects and I want to join them together to be one object. This is slightly different from grouping them together. Easy, we just go to Path, Union, and it joins them together. We can also do difference. Then the one on top is gonna cut out the overlapping part. These are actually quite useful tools. We also have intersection. It means everything gets cut out except for the parts where they overlap. We also have exclusion. Only the part where they overlap gets cut out. But they form one object at the end. And we also have division. It cuts them into separate objects, and the overlapping part becomes its own object. Cut path is basically the same. Okay. Remember, you can find all of these on the path and then over here. So, next we're going to talk about alignment. I'm just gonna delete this temporarily. Let's make this square a red circle. Oh, excuse me. Let's make it blue. And I don't know, a star, a polygon, and let's make it magenta or purple, and a star. Oh, why didn't it be a star? Okay, let's delete it. Delete that. Start again, make sure we have star. Why is it not a star? It's probably, that's why, right? The spoke ratio wasn't good. Okay. And let's make that one green. Okay, we have 4 objects. And I'm kind of a neurotic guy. I want to make them really nicely arranged, but it's really taking a lot of time, so I have shortcuts for that. So we're going to select all of them, and we're going to go to align and distribute, which looks like this. You can also find it, I think you can also find it, where was it? No. Oh, whatever. You can find it in this bar down here. And now we have all these alignment options. So we can make them all so that the bottoms are aligned. Or we can make them so that the centers are aligned. Or we can make them so that the tops are aligned. Or we could do it all compared to the top edge anchor. Equally, we can do that vertically if we like. So let's select them all and do it like that. So the left edge is aligned, the center edge is aligned, or the right edge is aligned. We can also do it with a distribution. So I want them distributed equally. Let's select them all. And I want the tops to have an equal distribution. So top to top to top to top is going to have the same distance. Top to top to top to top, they all have the same distance. Or bottom to bottom to bottom to bottom to bottom. Or center to center to center to center. Also, we can make sure that the space in between is constant, is always equal, like that. So now the distance is, this distance is exactly the same as this distance, is exactly the same as this distance. And we got the exact same for horizontally. The distance from this edge to this edge is the exact same as the distance from this edge to this edge. And it's also the exact same as the distance from this edge to this edge. Or the center, the distance from this center to this center equals this center to this center. That's a mouthful. You get what I'm saying, I hope. Okay, that's the alignment and distribution tool. Bring forward and send backwards. We've already seen it using layers. So the green star is in front of the red rectangle. Let's see. We can move it down below. And there it's behind now. But a much easier way to do it is to use these buttons. So we have the selection tool, we select the shape, and we can move it down. Or we can move it up. Or we could set it all the way to the bottom. Or we could set it all the way to the top. If it's all the way to the top, it's guaranteed that it's the top one within this layer 1. And if it's set it all the way to the bottom, it's guaranteed it's the bottom one. Easy. Ooh, I'm getting tired. Okay, layout. It's a lot in one go. Rulers, grids, guidelines, snapping. Ruler. There's this little ruler here, and the ruler I can use to hover over any shape, and it tells you the parameters, the width, the height, the x coordinate and the y coordinate, and the length. I can also click on one point and another point. Oh, let me just click it. You click and drag, and it tells you the distance and the angle as well. Easy. Incidentally, also up here we have a ruler which shows the x coordinate and the y coordinate. We can change it. Right now it's in millimeters. You go to File, Document Properties. We can change it to centimeters or pixels. Oh, that's the size. We have to do it in the display units. Display units, pixels. So now over here we see the pixels. We can click on these rulers on the top or on the bottom and then drag, and that creates a guide. And we can create as many guides as we want, vertical and horizontal. And if we want to click on it, we can set the precise coordinate exactly, and we can even name our guide. So let's say we want one exactly at 100. Or we can click and drag to move it. We can also right click and delete. Oh, excuse me. If we want to delete it, we just move it off the stage. Double click. Let's set the y coordinate to exactly 400. How about exactly 900? Okay. So that's guides. What about grids? We can go to View, Document Properties, and oh, by the way, we can change the color of the guides if we want, and we can hide the guides if we want. Also, grids. We can create a rectangular grid. Let's create a new rectangular grid. And we set the spacing over here. 2 pixel spacing. The major grid lines have now 15 pixel spacing, I believe. And the minor grid lines have a 2 pixel spacing. There's the minor ones. If we zoom in, by the way, Control and the mouse wheel zooms in and out. If we zoom in enough, we see the minor grid lines as well. So rulers, grids, guidelines, snapping. Snapping is extremely useful. Snapping is in the top right hand. Right now snapping is toggled off. I can toggle it on. Now it's on. And as I click and drag, it automatically lines up with these grid lines. So it's very useful to create precise shapes. If you're tired of snapping, you just click it off again. Or if you want more fine control over the snapping, let's click on these things. So we're gonna snap bounding boxes and nodes and alignment. But if we want to go to advanced mode, we can see what to snap to what. Normally, what I do is I deactivate most things. So I don't care about grids for now. I only want to snap the edges of one object to the edges of another object. And then ignore nodes and grids and everything else. So now I can move freely, but let's say we Ctrl D to duplicate. We can move freely as well. Except when we get, oh, doesn't work. I want the corner of this to snap with the corner of this. Right. And edges. So the corners and edges are snapping together. Corner to corner and corner to edge. Or if we just want only corner to corner, excuse me, we remove this edge. Now it's going to be only corner snapping with other corners. Phew, okay. I think that explains it well enough. Let's be quick and move on, because time's a wasting. Let me just remove this grid for now. And let's switch off snapping for now, and let's just start with a clean slate again for the next topic. Okay, so we've got color picker and color systems. Color picker, we've got here a nice green color. And let's change the color. We can use the color picker to change the color. I just clicked on the gray and it became gray inside. Or let's click over here. It's completely black. You can click and drag. So here now I'm clicking and I'm getting a whole bunch of gray, a whole bunch of white, and a little bit of black. So it should end up a bit mostly white. So it's gonna probably end up light gray. Right. Easy, right? Another way to get there is using the fill color. We have the ability to pick color using this. Okay, so what about color? Excuse me. What about color systems? Very quickly, let's talk about color systems. So I already told you that I prefer HSL. H stands for hue, saturation, lightness. Hue just means which color. Is it red, green, blue, pink, orange, whatever, yellow, right? So you just pick the color. Then you also pick how much color is in it. Saturation, if it's 100%, it's very bright. If it's 0%, it's gray. So if you have a movie in black and white, it's got 0% saturation. If you want to draw a depressing picture of a rainy day, you use very low saturation. If you want to draw something super cheerful like a circus clown, you use very high saturation. And then we've got darkness, 0% or lightness. 0% lightness means no light, it's completely black. 100% lightness means entirely light, it's white. And then somewhere in between, it shows actually the color. But it can be darker or it can be lighter. So light red is pink, and dark red is like, I don't know, brown, maroon, I don't know what it's called. This kind of weird dark red color. Okay, that's HSL. 3 numbers determine the color in terms of color, saturation, lightness. We also have HSV, which is basically the exact same thing, but in this case it's hue, saturation, value. And instead of turning it white, it actually makes it as light as possible without turning it white. But you can still turn it white by putting the saturation down to 0. It's basically the same, but only slightly different. Red, green, blue, it mixes red with green with blue. I don't like thinking like this, but it's quite useful because there's red, green, and blue diodes in our monitor. And everything we're watching right now is a combination of little red lamps, little green lamps, and little blue lamps, mixing the colors. So thinking in terms of red, green, and blue is quite useful for people making computer games. Then we've got CMYK, which stands for cyan, which is the amount of light blue we have in every color. Magenta, which is a kind of pink. And yellow. And then black. In this case, it's useful for people who have printers and publishing books, because when we print with ink, and it's usually a combination between cyan ink, magenta ink, yellow ink, and black ink. So the more black ink you add, the darker the color becomes. The more cyan ink you add, the bluer it becomes. The more magenta ink you add, the pinker it becomes, and the more yellow, obviously. Right? Okay. Those are the 4 color systems we need to know. It's not likely to come up on the exam. They might tell you like, give me 100% color with 100% red and 150 green and 40 blue. They might tell you that, but it's not likely. But anyway, better know it just to be on the safe side. It's useful for identifying coloring. It's much more likely that this is going to come up on paper 3. So know it for paper 3. But for paper 4, just know how to use it. Just be sure that if they tell you it's in 100% red, 50% green, and 0% blue, that you're gonna, and that you know how to implement it. So this paper, be sure you know how to do it. Understanding is useful, but you don't necessarily have to understand. You have to be able to do. Okay, crop and clip. So cropping in Inkscape is easy. We're just going to take our mask. We're going to take a shape, and this shape is going to be a mask. Let's change the color to make it a bit easier to understand. Let's make our mask black, and let's make it transparent so we can see what's happening underneath. And I want, let's say we're drawing a nice picture, but I want to cut off this edge, and I only want to keep what's underneath the mask. So let's take these pictures and object, group them together, and now I'm going to select this, the mask. I'm going to only keep what's beneath and select what's below, and we go to object, clip, set clip, and we only keep the part that's below the mask. If we want to undo that, we can always go to object, clip, release clip. We also have a mask, but we don't need to know about that. That's called cropping and clipping. Oh, we're almost there. Let's talk about exporting now. Oh, why did I? Exporting SVG. So we're in Inkscape. One good thing about Inkscape is it's always SVG. We just have to save it, and it counts as SVG, drawing.svg. Great. But when I want to export, we go to File, Export, and we have to choose what we want to export. We want to export the entire everything I have selected, or we can export the entire page, or we can select export only what we have selected, or we can export custom and set the width and height manually. You can see down here what it's gonna look like. Let's move the top down there. Okay. Once we've done, we can export as PNG, JPEG, PDF, and TIFF. And then we click on this browser and we select the path. I'm just going to put mine on the desktop temp. I don't know, what are we going to call it? Let's call it 9626 Inkscape drawing. And then click on export. Oh, I already have one, but I'm sure it'll be fine. Because it is in the temp folder after all. And here we have it. A nice PNG file. Remember, PNG includes transparency information, but it might be useful to know that JPEG does not include transparency information. Window, SVG, we didn't do BMP, JPEG, PNG, TIFF, PDF, TIFF, PDF, but GIF and BMP, we don't know yet. So if it comes up on the exam that you have to export it as BMP or GIF, the best thing to do is to export it, first of all, as PNG. And then we're going to go to Gimp. I know we haven't covered Gimp yet, but we will. So we're going to start Gimp up, and just to change the format, the most straight, it's not necessarily the most efficient, but the most straightforward thing to do is just drag and drop your drawing into Gimp and then export it from here. And now we have, for BMP, it's under W, very useful, very easy to remember, not, because it's Windows bitmap image. I'm going to export it as a Windows bitmap image. And then I usually just ignore all this stuff. Just click on export. And here we have the BMP version. GIF, we can also do export it as a GIF. File, export as. GIF is usually animated. In this case, it's not, but we don't need to worry about animation when it comes to Gimp and Inkscape. That's in the animation chapter. But GIF also works very well for still images as well. And it also supports transparency. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about text. Let's close Gimp again. Text. Here we have the text button. And we're going to type. La la la. I'm very eloquent, I know. Okay, I'm getting a bit tired. My jokes are terrible. I think it's going to be a bestseller. Here we have, let's delete this. Here we have some text. We have the selection tool. If we want to change the text, we can go back to the text tool and we can change it. Or we can select the whole thing, or you can press, instead of clicking and dragging, you can also press Control A while you have your text tool in the right text box, and we can change the font. I suggest you have a sans serif like this one, or a serif font ready that you know you're going to use in case it comes up, because they often say use a serif font or a sans serif font. And we can also, most of the time, not for all fonts, it's not available for all fonts, but most of the time we can make it bold, italics, etc. Here we can change the size. Normally PT is for font, and we can do the normal, like 12 or something. We can also increase the line spacing. And we can also center a line, right a line, left a line. Oh, what happened? Oh my goodness. You know what I said about when you get confused? Just Control Z until you're back at a stage where you're not confused anymore. Okay, here we have the text. We also want to learn about spacing. So spacing, we had a little thing called spacing between letters. It changes the spacing between all the letters, which we can make even negative if we want. But I'm going to put it back to how it was. And then we have spacing between words, spacing between all the words, which can also be negative. Of course, it doesn't make sense to make it negative in 99.9% of the time, unless you're doing like a really cool effect. Now here we have something called, which is new for me, it's called kerning. Kerning, you can do individual spacing between different letters. So let's say I'm happy with the spacing between the letters in all of these, but I feel like, I don't know, the G and the A needs a little bit more space. So here we can increase it, and it only increases the space between the G and the A, where I have the cursor right now, in other words. Or again, you can also make it negative if you like. But the spacing between all the other letters remains the same. If you want to be a publisher, this is very useful, and you use it all the time. But for me, it's the first time I ever used it. Now we also have this. We can create an offset in the vertical direction as well. So this is called vertical kerning. And we can also rotate letters. But then we need to have a whole bunch of letters. Yeah. It rotates one letter at a time. As you can see, the A is rotating. We can do it for multiple letters at a time too. I don't think this is actually in the syllabus, but if might be helpful for you if you're doing it just for fun. Okay, this is also not in the syllabus, but you can change the direction of this. Okay, hold on. Select it, Control A. We can make the text vertical. There's all sorts of useful stuff you can do. And then we can do it in different ways. Okay, that's all. So let's see, font we saw, size, kerning, letter spacing, line spacing, right. Fitting text to a path or shape. Okay, so here we have some text, right? And I want to fit it into, I want to make a circle. Let's do this. Let's go here and put back a stroke, a nice, I don't know why, there it is. A nice black stroke. The opacity must be, okay. And we're gonna fit this text into this shape. So first, to do that, this is actually called a text object, and we want to convert it to a path object. So first we go to path, object to path. Now, if we look a bit more closely, we see we can move individual nodes. But the downside is that we can't use this text tool anymore. So before you do that, make sure you're satisfied with the path, or satisfied with the text, or it's gonna cause a lot of extra work. So I messed up. I wasn't supposed to turn it into a path. That's later. Okay, so what do you do when you mess up and you get confused? You just press Ctrl Z until you're back to a place where you were not confused anymore. So now now it's text again. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to select my text first, and then hold on Shift and select a circle, and we go to text, put on path, and here we have the text is drawn around on the path. Now we're going to go back to my circle and go to the node tool. I'm going to increase the size of the circle, and as you can see, the text follows. Let's say we want to move the starting point of this text. We can always go to here and prepend it with spaces to set the starting point of the text. And we can also change the size and everything we want to do still. So that's how to put a text if we just want if we want it in the shape and we want to hide this thing, we can just make it 100% transparent and just the text remains. We can even just delete it actually. No, we can't. And we can move the text around. So now be careful. What happens sometimes is I have my object on 100% transparent and I'm trying to draw something and it just doesn't appear. That's because I put it on 100% transparent and I just forgot. So I have to remember, if that happens, if you're drawing something and nothing appears, it's probably the reason. It might be because the opacity is on a 0%, or it might be over here, or you might be just drawing something completely white. Just check the fill and stroke dialog if that happens. Okay. Let's also, if you have an invisible object, it's kind of hard to find it back. So I'm gonna just click and drag a huge rectangle, and here's my invisible object. And I'm gonna put it back there. Another way to find an invisible object is to use this tool and find it. So we go like that. Where's my invisible object? Ah, there it is. Okay, very useful, but sometimes causes confusion. Okay, let's Control Z, 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 Z. Okay, so in order to demonstrate this one, let's make a new text. I'm gonna delete this text, and I'm just gonna do something super hippie. Oh, it's in the wrong direction. Okay, love, 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 love. All you need is love. Control C, Control V, 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 V to make it super long. And let's also draw a heart. This is actually pretty good exercise. So I really recommend that you follow along with me. And let's curve the heart like this. So this is great on Valentine's Day, or if you're just making some kind of hippie poster. We're going to take this text and we're going to fit it into this heart. So we're going to select the text, select the heart, and we're going to go text, flow into frame. And as you can see, it fits nicely, and it even skips this part where there's a gap in the shape. We can adjust it manually if there's some part, like here's a kind of a big gap. So let's just select it, decrease the text size, and then just Control C, Control V, 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 V until we filled up the whole shape. And if we want, we can also change the border to make it look nicer. And the text follows along. So that was text, flow into frame. Okay, moving on. Converting text to curves. This is what I showed you by mistake. Let's just Control Z until this text is back here. And now we have a text object, and we can use this text thing to change all of the spelling. Let's say we make a typo, but if we want, we can change this into a path. So we click path, object to path. And now it's not text object anymore, so we can't use this. But we can use this and change the nodes around. So it used to be a text object, and now it's a path or a curve. So that's how we convert text to curves, which is quite useful when it comes to the last thing of this checklist is envelope and perspective. The last thing of this section of the checklist, I should say. Let's Control Z again. And let's make a new text. And the text is now long, long ago in a galaxy far away. Well, I guess you know where this is heading. If you don't, you really have to watch Star Wars. You young kids haven't even watched Star Wars. Anyway, here we have text, and if you know Star Wars, you see that in the beginning they have this text and it seems to be going off into the distance. So but this text is flat. So we're going to give the same effect to this text. So to do that, we need to go to path effects. Only, as we just talked about, this is not a path, this is an object. First thing we have to do is convert it to a path. So make sure there's no spelling mistakes or anything, because if there are, you're gonna have to Control Z and undo all that work and then fix it. So better make sure it's alright the way it is. But when you're sure it's alright, we're gonna go to path, object to path. And here we have a path. And now let's select it, make sure it's one group. It's already one group. And we click on the plus. And we've got two things we want to talk about. We want to talk about the envelope deformation and the perspective stroke envelope. Let's start with the envelope deformation. So here we can set the top path and the bottom path, and the right path and the left path. Let's click edit on canvas, and as you can see, we can move the top path like this, and the text or the shape tries to follow along. It gets deformed. It tries to follow the path. We can also make it smaller, and we can add a node. In fact, let's hold on Shift and select both these nodes and add a node, and let's make it a triangle. Oh, I don't know why it's doing this. Like this. And let's do the same for the bottom path. Select both. Add a node. And now it looks like this. You don't have to do it with text, you can do it with any path. It just warps the object to try to fit this envelope. Let's change this to a curve, and let's do it like this, and let's do the same with the top one, and now we can make some pretty cool shapes. And you can do the same with the right and the left side of the envelope. Okay, if you're done, if you're sure you want it like this, we can go to path, object to path, and now we can't really change it. Now we're back like this. Of course, you can always press Ctrl Z. And it's back. Or if we want to remove it, we can just click on this. Or we can hide the distortion. Let's remove it. The other one we want to see is the perspective envelope, which is basically the same thing. We have applied the perspective envelope. Now we want to go to the Bezier curves, and we can only change 4 nodes, only the corner nodes. And we're going to just make it look like it's floating off in the distance. This is called perspective because what's further away is narrower and what's closer is wider. Let's Ctrl Z. Mirror movements horizontal means I can just move one of them, and the other one will, the bottom one will also do exactly, will mirror. Or mirror vertically. That way we can make sure it's stays symmetrical. Okay. That's it for this part. So we've done most. We just have, here we have it again. This can be deleted. Next, convert to curves. We've already done it. But what I didn't mention is that you don't only have to do it for text, you can also do it for any object, like a rectangle object, path. So right now we've got 2 corners and rounding, but we can also do path, object to path, and instead of 2 corners and rounding, we have all these nodes, individual nodes. And we can change individual nodes. Same for shape, same for circles and stars. Right now we have a simple node and we can just, oh excuse me, path, object to path. Easy. Path, object to path. Replication is easy. We have an object or a path, we select it, we press Ctrl D for duplicate, and then we can move it by clicking and dragging, and we have an exact double. Also, by the way, we can do Ctrl X to cut, and then Ctrl V, Ctrl V, Ctrl V. Or we can do Ctrl C to copy, Ctrl V. Exact same thing, really. Okay. Transform tools we already talked about. We just have this selection tool and we can stretch, scale, blah, blah, blah. Fill tools, solid and gradient and opacity. Fill. Oh my gosh, this is stroke, not fill. We remove the stroke and we're going to add the fill. And we can change the color like this, as we've already seen. But what we can also do, we've also seen the opacity, which we can do either here and here. What we haven't seen yet is blur, which is actually not in the syllabus, but you can make a pretty useful, it's pretty useful in general. And we can also do gradients. What we haven't seen yet is gradients. So for a gradient, we're going to click to this for the fill, and it automatically adds a gradient. And now we've got the first color, which is on the left hand side, which was the original color. And on the right hand side, we want another color. Right now it's transparent. So let's make the right hand gradient fully opaque too, but we're going to change the color. So now we're doing from red to blue. Easy, right? We can add multiple stops. I double click somewhere in the middle and I'm going to put green in the middle. And we can move it to the left and to the right. You could also do it down here, add and remove stops. Okay. That's a linear gradient. We can also create radial gradients. The gradient is the same, but it's circular instead of linear. And that's all we need to know about gradients. Incidentally, no, I forgot one thing. Let's go back to the linear gradient. We can go here to the create and edit gradients. And as you can see, or I think it also works with the node, edit paths by node. Yeah, we can see that we can change the start location and the end location of the gradient. And we can also move the intermediate points. So we can make diagonal gradients too. Something like this as well. And to go back to the circular gradient, we can change the location of the center of the gradient, and we can stretch it out. So you can, like a cat's eye or whatever you want. Okay. That was the node editing tool. Edit nodes. We've done it. Add nodes, move and delete nodes. Just a quick reminder. Let's say we have a shape. We go to the node editor. We select two nodes and we can add the node in between. Or if we select all the nodes, it's going to add one node in the midpoint of each of these line segments. Or we can remove any number of nodes. So that was adding, moving, easy. Bezier handles. They're just talking about these direction handles. Symmetrical, asymmetrical, cusp and smooth nodes. This is a cusp because it's a corner. This one is smooth, but not necessarily, but asymmetric because because they're always parallel, but one is longer, one is shorter. This one is symmetric. And then we've got auto smooth, which is quite useful when we want to automatically create a blob. Align and distribute nodes. So when we have these nodes selected, we can align the nodes using also the align dialog. So now they're all on one line, one horizontal line, but I could also put them on one vertical line or distribute them evenly so the space between them is constant vertically and horizontally. Okay. Final topic about vector is tracing. Okay, I'm gonna have to download a picture. I'll be right back. I'm just gonna pause it quickly. Okay, so let's say we have a raster image, a PNG or a JPEG, and we want to import it into our picture. So in order to do that, it's quite easy. We're going to just take our picture, our JPEG in this case, and just click and drag it. And it's gonna say, should we embed it or link it? So it's best just to embed from file and leave this as none. Click on OK. And now we have an object, a raster object, but we cannot change individual nodes, right? So what we really want to do is we want to convert this into a raster object. So let's select it, and then we're going to go over here, and we're going to go to our path, trace bitmap. And we can convert what we have into a vector drawing. So I'm going to just, let's say I want different regions for colors. We go to color quantization. And we want only, oh, I don't know why it's in black and white. Let's see. Because we're in single scan. Single scan, it's going to make only one layer. Let's go to multicolor. And not brightness steps, but colors. And I think just two scans is enough. And let's move it a bit. Remove background. Nah, you play around a bit like this until you get a nice update where it's good enough, and click on apply. And now we have the vector version of the same drawing. In fact, it's a group. So let's double click on it, and as you can see, it's a group. And when we click on individual objects within the group, we can move them. and we can edit them using the Bezier curve. And that's all. Oh, that was quite tiring. Next, we're gonna switch to the other checklist, which is about Gimp. And we're gonna do all this stuff for Gimp. But I need a rest, so I'm gonna have a short break. I think I have lunch. I'm gonna see you in a little bit. So, welcome back. I'm back from my lunch break. In fact, I got just a little bit distracted and now it's 4 days later. But that's okay. I hope you weren't waiting long, right? So, let's get started. We're gonna start with something simple. We're gonna start with brush and pencil tools. So here's Gimp, and this is what it looks like. You might have something like this. If you do, I recommend you go and do a single window mode. Single window mode simply means you've got your toolbox and all your dockable dialogues in the same window as your canvas. But if you prefer to work with floating dialogues, you can go like this too. Okay, but I'm gonna work like this. Another thing is you might not have all the same dialogues open as me. If you ever get stuck, you can go up here, dockable dialogues, and open it. For example, layers. If you don't have this one, you can easily open. We can move these layers, these dialogues around and make them float if you prefer, but we can also put them back in. If you want to dock them back in the window, we can click on this part and move it back in. So when I hover over it, I can see the name of the dialogue. And let me close it. And now we're gonna go and open it again. Two options it was called. All the way up here. And it's back, but it came back up here. That's unfortunate because it's gonna confuse you if you're following along with me. So I'm gonna put it back to its original location. Okay. Just like in Inkscape, here are the tools and the buttons, the options which show up when I'm in the tool options dialog changes depending on which tool we have selected. So let's go file new and let's just make an empty image. We've got the width and the height over here. I'm just going to leave that as is. And now for some reason I have a red background, which is very ugly. So I'm going to put it back to white. And I may as well show you the fill tool. It's a bit easier on the eyes. The fill tool we can find in the toolbox, but all the tools are kind of bunched together. So if you don't know where they are, it might take some time to find it. Here we have the bucket fill tool. So where the gradient tool is, we right click, and instead of gradient we pick bucket fill tool. And I'm gonna right click, no, I'm gonna set the color up here to white and click over there to fill it. And then I'm gonna set it back to black. So I promised you we're gonna talk about brushes and pens. This, by the way, is a foreground and this is a background color. But let's not get further distracted. Let's talk about brushes and pens. Where are the brushes and pens? I think it's paintbrush. Here, my paintbrush tool. Let's just use a regular paintbrush. Let's start with pencil. Pencil is easy. Once we have a pencil selected, we have all these options over here and we can paint. We can increase the size or decrease the size. We can change the shape. We can change the aspect ratio. Let's just keep it on 0 to make it circular. And a lot of these settings depend on if you assume you're using a stylus. We don't need to use a stylus, we're just using a mouse. That just means when we click, we're pushing down with maximum force. Okay, we don't really need to know what angle and spacing and hardness means. We can also use the paintbrush. A paintbrush is like a pencil, but it has a bit more soft edges. And for both these, we can change the color by changing the foreground color. Okay, I'm going to press Ctrl A to select everything and then delete. We can change the shape of our paintbrush. We can change the hardness. If it's softer, it's more blurry. We also have another brush called the airbrush. And the airbrush is nothing more than a very soft brush. It's quite useful in digital painting. But we won't talk too much about the airbrush, we don't need to know. So that's really all we need to know about brush and pencil tools. Now let's go all the way up here and have a look at the common skills. We have layers. The layer dialog is over here. Again, if you don't have it, you can click on Windows, Dockable Dialogs, Layers. And as you can see, just like with Inkscape, it's exactly the same thing. We can make layers invisible. Oh, excuse me. We can add a new layer. And then we can do all the, we can add all these properties. But normally I'm just going to keep it as standard. Gray and white means transparent. We can also lock a layer. So now I can't draw on this layer, but I can draw on the background layer. We can also lock the position and the size. So we can't move the layer. And we can also lock the alpha. That means the transparency will stay the same. The opacity will stay the same at every pixel, which is quite useful for digital painting. We can create group layers, and we can easily move things into the layer. I'm going to remove this background layer. Right click, delete layer. Let's remove this group layer as well and add a new layer. And now we've got 2 layers. And let's say on layer 1 we have this shape, and on layer 2 we change the color. We have this shape. We can change the, we see the top layer is in the foreground and the blue and the bottom layer is on the background, but we can easily change it around by dragging and dropping. Then we can also right click and merge down, and this merges the current layer I have selected with the layer just below it. And we also have flatten, which merges all layers together. So even if I have 100 layers, I just click flatten and I end up with only one layer. Also, all the transparency has turned into the background color. And I press Ctrl Z. Okay. So add, remove, order, hide and lock. Flatten, merge. Blend we didn't do yet. Blend we can see up here. We've got normal, but we can change it to all sorts of different blending modes. Dissolve, color erase, erase. So here the top layer acts as a layer erasing layer. Merge, it says, I don't really know what that does, to be honest. Okay. We have screen, which lightens the layer below. The top layer lightens the layer below. And we have multiply, which is kind of like the opposite of screen. It darkens the layer below. We also have different kinds of lighten. These are all have a darkening effect, but the exact calculations are slightly different. And these all have lightening effects, but the exact calculations are slightly different. And then we have quite useful things, which is a combination of lighten and darken, including overlay. But I won't really go into, we don't really need to know it in detail. Not according to the syllabus anyway. But some of them are pretty cool effects. If you're curious, if you're interested in digital painting, I recommend you look up overlay at least, what it does. Okay, let's put it back to normal. So that's talking about blend layers and opacity of layers. Where was the opacity of layer? Here, up here. So we can make any layer more or less opaque. Okay, next let's have a look at the transform functions. Here we have layer 1, and we've got a whole bunch of transform functions up here. We've got rotate. We just choose the tool, select a layer, and then we can change using the dialog up here. Oh. We can change using the dialog up here. We can also change the center of rotation. Or we can just use the mouse. To do it. And once we're done, we click on rotate. And we end up with a floating selection. Usually I just go to new layer. And I delete the other layer, which is now empty. That's rotate, scale, it's the exact same thing. Well, now I have layer 2 selected. Once we have scale, we're going to scale the whole layer. Like this. Or we can even move it around. Or we can hold down Shift. Or Control to rotate from the center. Or Shift and Control. Incidentally, if we go to the selection tool, let's click the rectangle select. And now we're going to do scale. It's only going to scale the selected part. And it cuts out the part which we didn't scale. And now we have 2 layers. So I'm going to click to right click to new layer, and we've got one transformed layer and the original layer, which still has this part in it. Okay, what else? We have shear. What else do we have? We have flip. Oh, that only works with when there's paths. Perspective. When it comes to perspective, we can move the corners of this layer and change the perspective so that this part will be bigger and this part will be smaller. It's basically an envelope tool. And then we've got the 3D transform, which means let's pick this layer. 3D transform. We can rotate it in space. And we've got the handle transform. Play around with it, it's pretty fun. But we don't really need to know it, but it may very well end up being pretty useful in the exam. It's not specifically mentioned in the syllabus, but it's quite useful in many situations. Okay. So we had resize, skew, reflect, rotate, move, scale. Scale is the same as resize. Shear is the same as skew. Envelope and perspective. We've had perspective. Let me just create some new. Let's just delete all these layers. And let's create a very quick picture using a pencil on a new layer. Oh, I'm an artist. Okay. We're going to use the cage transform. Wait, let's do perspective again, because it might be a bit easier to see what's going on. In fact, and let's select only the face, and then we'll do perspective tool. And as you can see, yeah, I still have a floating selection. Let's say to new layer, and let's transform it. Let's move it. Oh, let's move it. Oh my goodness. To the middle. Okay. So here we were. Oh, no, I have the wrong. This yellow line, by the way, it shows the size of the layer. So here we have a cage, and now I can warp this by changing the size of the cage. I can also make it smaller, and it tries to make it smaller too. And then we also have the warp transform. Let me Control Z that. The warp transform. In fact, we're going to have a look at the warp transform on another day. Envelope and perspective. Cage tool is the envelope tool. Okay. Reflect. You can use the scale tool or the unified transform tool and hold down shift, and that will reflect it. Here, this is an exact reflection. And now we go back to how we were originally. Or around the other axis. That keeps the size exact same. We also have layer, transform, flip. That's much easier. Layer, transform, flip. Okay. Okay, next let's talk about groups. We can group and ungroup. We've already talked about grouping layers and ungrouping layers. Let's create two new groups. And let's show how I can move these layers into a group. I've just created some dots on the stage, and each dot is on a different layer. Now we've got different layer groups, and each dot is in it, and we've got one group of 3 dots and one group of 2 dots. And now when we go to the unified transform tool, we can select the group, and when we move it, it's going to move all 3 of them. Or when we scale it, it's going to scale all 3 dots. Everything in the group. If we select individual layers, it moves only one of them. To ungroup, we just simply drag and drop them out of the group. Okay. Next, let's talk about join, add, subtract, and intersect. Unfortunately, in Gimp, there's no easy way to do these things. It's just how groups work together. So don't worry, we don't really need to know this explicitly because we can do this in Inkscape. And we will never be asked explicitly on the exam to use a certain technique like join, add, subtract, or intersect. But they will just give us a problem to solve. And if you feel like you need to use these, one solution would be just to go to Inkscape, do it in Inkscape, and then export what you need, and then import that joined or intersected shape back into Gimp, and that's probably the best way to do it. So we can't really do it in Gimp. I'm just gonna color it bold to remind us that we didn't manage to do it. But let's move on to alignment. In alignment, we have a bunch of layers and they each have a dot, but each layer is as big as the whole canvas, and we want to demonstrate, in order to demonstrate alignment, it's much easier to think in terms of these dots. So I'm going to shrink the size of each layer to the size of the dot. So for each layer I've selected, we're going to go to Layer, Crop to Content. And as you can see, in this yellow line, which shows the size of the layer, has shrunk to the size of this dot. And let's do that for each layer. Okay, so now we want to align them. We've got the alignment tool up here. If we want to use the alignment tool, we select the object we want to align. We can hold down Shift to select multiple objects. And they're going to align relative to the layer boundaries. So here I have relative to selection, and that means it's all going, I have these 5 dots selected, and I'm going to align center of target. So they all get centrally aligned. We can also choose relative to the first item which we had selected, which means they're going to align up over there. Or we can also do select to the image, the canvas size. So here that's right in the center of the canvas, or on the left side of the canvas, on the right side of the canvas, on the bottom, on the top, or completely in the middle. Okay, so what about distribute? Using these buttons we can distribute it. Let's first make sure that the offset is 0 and 0, otherwise some weird things are going to happen. And now, making sure we have the alignment tool selected, we can select the objects we want to align. So let's say we want to distribute. So let's say we want to distribute these 3 dots equally across the screen relative to the image. We just have them selected, and let's put them all on the same line, and let's distribute them evenly. And as you can see, they're now evenly distributed. We could also make a little rectangle, and we could change up to here relative to selection, and then let's select these 3, and then let's say we want them centered around this selection, but distribute them evenly across this selection. So it's pretty useful, this alignment and distribute tool. That covers this. Also, we have bring forward and send backwards. Here we're just talking about which dot should be at the front and which dot should be at the bottom, which matters, for example, if we have different colors. So let me color this one red and this one green. And let's create a little overlap using the move tool. So we can see that the red is on top, but we can move it to the bottom, all the way to the bottom, move up and move down, which covers that. Okay, layout. We can add rulers, grids, guidelines, and snapping too. So to add ruler, this up here is the ruler. If you don't see it, we can go to view, show rulers. To hide it, so make sure show rulers is selected. Once we have show rulers selected, we can add guides. These are guides. If you want to set the guides a bit more precisely, we will go to image guides, new guides by percent or by position. So let's put one at exactly 250. And now that we have these guides here, we can make sure that snapping is on. View, snap to guides. And we move this. And as you can see, it snaps to these guides. Either the center or the corner or the edge snaps to these guides. Can be very useful, especially when you're drawing precisely. We also have a grid. Let's switch off snap to guides and let's switch on snap to grid. And let's also show the grid. So now we can put these dots where we want them with respect to these grids. Okay. What's next? How can we change this grid? Where was it again? I forgot. I think it's edit, preferences. No, it's not in default grid. It's in image. Hold on, I'm just going to pause it while I find where it is. Ah, there it is. I found it. It's in image, configure grid. And here we can set the horizontal spacing, which can be in pixels or inches or centimeters. Here we're locking the aspect ratio. So we can, if we unlock that, we can have rectangular. And we can also have the pixels as well. So now we have a rectangular grid. Each of these grids is a rectangle. And we can do whatever we want. We can even change the color. Okay, let's hide them again because I don't really like working with a grid. But it can be very useful when you want to draw with precision. Moving on, we've got rulers, grids, guides, and snapping. That's all. Okay, color picker, and color systems. So we've already changed the color, which you can see up here. It's basically hue, darkness, and saturation, just like in Inkscape. And we also have something over here where we can change the values. We can also press CMYK, and we can also do this one, which is basically the same as this triangle. Or if you want to put in precisely red, green, and blue values, we can do it over here. Let's say we want to remove all red, remove all green, and add 100% blue. Then we like this. Or if we don't know the RGB values, but we know we have this color here somewhere, we can just click with this eyedropper and pick the color we want. We can find this eyedropper, I believe, up here as well. Yeah, here it is. We have a color picker tool. Incidentally, we also have a measure tool. This is like a ruler too. We can click and drag, and down here we see the angle and the length. So this is also useful when it comes to precision drawing as well. Okay. We have cropping and clipping. This is our crop tool. If we use a crop tool, we can just select which part of our picture we want to keep. And once we've created a rectangle, we can resize it like this. And then we just press enter. And once we press enter, it just removes the canvas, the parts which we don't want. Okay, so that talks about cropping, but does not actually talk about clipping. Clipping actually is very similar to intersect and subtract. And we're going to talk about that later. That's going to come. We're going to talk about that when we're talking about masks. Okay, so what's next? Next we have exporting. So we've already seen the BMP and GIF. Let's see if we can export the others as well. So we'll go to File, Export As, and we're gonna go over here to GIF. Right, it's there. JPEG, it's there. PNG, it's there. PDF, it's there. TIFF, it's there. Bitmap, it's there. So what was that? Bitmap, JPEG, PNG, TIFF, PDF. Only thing that's not there is SVG. SVG is vector. So with GIMP we usually make raster graphics. We don't make vector graphics. So it doesn't really make sense to be able to export as an SVG. So that's why it's not there. However, GIMP does have some vector tools. So let's go and find one of these vector tools. It's this one, the paths tool, and let's create a nice path. And press enter when we're done. And let's make it a bit more of an interesting shape. Like so. Whatever. That's good enough. And let's go to the paths dialog. Remember, if you don't have the paths dialog, you can always find it over here. Paths. And we're gonna export the path. Just right click, export path. And let's see if I'm gonna export as test.svg. And let's see if it opens. Yeah, it opens. And we can even edit individual nodes. Let's hide this. Let's delete these paths, which I created earlier. Okay, go back to layer, Control Shift A. Okay, here we go. Let's create a new text. We just have the text tool up here, and let's click and type something. Hello, everybody. We can change the color here. Justify or letter spacing. Line spacing. Let's add some more lines. How do you do today? Increase, decrease. Also, when it comes to kerning, we can increase the space between individual letters. Let's change the font up here. We can also change the font size. This is for what I currently have selected, but if I want to do it for the whole text box, we can do it up here. Oh, okay. Let's delete this. Once we've changed it here, it overrides what happens here. So let's change it. So good to know, if you change it here, you won't be able to change it for all the text later. So here we can pick different fonts. Okay, let's save it. Which covers font size, kerning, letter spacing, line spacing. We also have aligning text along a line, which we can actually do in Gimp, but it's much easier to do it in Inkscape. So if it comes up, I recommend you combine Inkscape and Gimp to do whatever task they're asking you to do. Normally, we can export to PNG and import the whole thing into Inkscape or into Gimp, whichever you need, and then we can work with documents created by the one software and put it in the other software. When it comes to setting text in a shape, I don't know how to do that in Gimp, but you can do it very easily in Inkscape, as we've seen. So I'm just gonna mark these as bold, as these are two things we need to be able to know how to do in Inkscape, and we also need to know how to export it from one software to the other. Finally, we have converting text to curves. This is actually super easy in Gimp. Let's say we've got this text, we right click and we say text to path. Now we'll go to the path dialog. If you don't have this, you can always go to Windows, Dockable Dialogs, and find paths. And let's have a look and make it visible. So now we can see the path. We'll go back to here and make the text invisible. So we only have the path left. We can edit the path using the paths tool. As you can see. In order to demonstrate the raster tools, first let us import some pictures. Let's import this one first. You can download your own pictures, or if you like, the link in the description gives us if you want to download the same pictures, you can find them in the link in the description. As you can see, this picture is actually much bigger than the canvas size. So let's go to Image, Canvas Size, and we're going to increase it. No, it fits perfectly. Anyway, this is how we can resize the canvas. We can press center. In fact, actually, we can see the layer is as big as the image. Fit canvas to layers. There, okay, that's the whole image. It's much easier to go to image, fit canvas to layers to increase the canvas size. Let's actually get rid of all these guides. And let's get rid of all these other layers. Okay, let's get rid of these paths too. So now the first thing we want to see is the various selections. Let's start with the lasso tool. Let's say I want to remove this thing, this diamond which has as jewelry on her face. We can use the lasso selection tool. Let's zoom in, control mouse wheel. We've got to make sure that when we start with, we've got replace current selection. And I'm going to click multiple times to make this selection. Once I've made the selection, we press enter. And if I want to delete it, we press delete. This is very important. See how the background is white? That's because we did not activate alpha for this layer. So I'm going to press Ctrl Z. Then we're going to right click and say add alpha channel. And now when we press delete, we don't have white, but we have transparency below. Okay, let's press Ctrl Z again. We see we still have a bit of a blue edge. And let's say we've done most of the selection pretty well, but we want to add to the selection. We can go over here and we can add more to the selection. Now remember to press enter every time we've made a selection. I'm going to add even a little bit more. If you don't press enter, it won't you won't be able to add. Okay, I think I selected a bit too much, so I'm going to subtract. Let's subtract from the selection. There we go, enter. And now it's enough. We don't have only the lasso tool. We could also select this with an oval tool. And the oval tool also has an add and subtract mode. So we can cut pieces out of our selection or the replace, make a new selection. We also have the rectangle tool. Now we're in add mode or subtract mode. Okay. So what's that? We have seen lasso, cutout and crop we've already seen. Select, color select, and magic wand. We've got color select over here. Color select. Let's make sure it's on replace. And it selects this light blue color everywhere on the page. So that means if I select the right color, it's going to select this blue as well. Let's hold down shift to go to add automatically. In fact, let's decrease the threshold a bit. The lower the threshold, the more the lower the threshold, the stricter. Let's increase the threshold. The higher the threshold, when the threshold is higher, it's less strict. In addition to the lasso tool, we have all sorts of selection tools. We can also have a rectangle tool and we can add to our rectangle, and we can also subtract from our rectangle. We also have an oval, an ellipse select, which is useful sometimes. We can subtract from our ellipse, or we can add, or we can replace our current selection. Although, remember when you press Ctrl Z, it also affects the selection, which is actually quite useful at times. One thing, if you want a shortcut for adding, you just hold down Shift to add. And the shortcut for subtracting is hold down Ctrl to subtract. Now we have also got select by color. Let's say I want to remove all this green. We just select that, and everywhere where it looks green, it gets selected, and I can press delete, which takes some time, unfortunately. With the color tool, we can set the threshold. The lower the threshold, the more strict and the smaller an area it selects. We can also draw a mask, and if we draw a mask, we can click and drag down. Okay, let me just get rid of this selection by pressing Ctrl-Shift-A, and we can click and move down with the mouse to increase the size of the part that's going to be selected, or we can decrease it by moving up. So in this case, what might make sense is to make a pretty strong selection, and then we're going to use our lasso tool with subtract to get rid of this part. And then delete. And it removes the whole background. Okay, let's press Ctrl Z, Ctrl Shift A to remove the selection. We also have a fuzzy select tool. We also have a mask for that. What's the difference between the fuzzy select tool and the color select tool? The fuzzy select tool is only going to select in one area. Like for example, if I want to select this eye, I can do like this and like this, and it's not going to select this one. But with color select, it will select it because the eyes have the same color. So as you can see, not only is it selecting the eye, it's also selecting regions very far away from the area I'm selecting. So normally I will probably use fuzzy select tool, which covers magic wand, color select. We've also got cut out and crop. These tools can be used to cut out pieces of a selection. For example, let's just go like this. And then we go to select, invert selection, and then press Ctrl X. And it just cuts out everything except for this, which is basically the same as, very similar to crop. Now, when it comes to mask, we're going to talk about masks later. Let's move on with solid and gradient fills. So, Ctrl Shift A. Let's make a new layer. And in this new layer, we're going to use the fill tool to create a new color entirely. We can also create a shape and fill only the shape. And we can also create a gradient. And with the gradient, we can just click and drag, and it creates the gradient. Here we can pick the type of gradient we want. For example, foreground to background, or foreground color to background color. Or quite commonly used, foreground to transparent. Here we can create all sorts of useful effects like that. If you want to create a more complicated one than that, we're going to go to the gradient tool. If you don't have it open, Windows, dialogues, gradients, and we can click on custom. When we've clicked on custom, we can move these handles around, and we can move these handles around too. If we want to remove one of these handles, we just click here. Or if we want to add one, we just click here and we change the color. And we can add as many as we like. Oh, that's a midpoint. We can move this midpoint. But double click to change, to not add a midpoint, but to add a new stop. So you double click to add a new stop. Or if you're interested in taking one of these midpoints and shifting it up, just hover over until the circle appears and then move up. Move it up. Okay. So that's gradient fills. We can also convert to black and white and grayscale. Let's, oh, Control Z. Let's remove this layer. And here we have image, mode, grayscale. Turns it to black and white. We also have image, color management, precision, and we can change the number of bits which we're using in our color. Normally 8 bits is more than enough, but if you want a lot of information for our color, we can change it to 30-bit, 32 floating point. We can change the brightness and the contrast of our image. We can change the saturation, which is another way to change it to black and white, or we can make it more colorful than it was before. Color balance. We can go to color balance. And we can change the amount of cyan or the amount of red, magenta, green, yellow, blue. That changes the color balance of our image. Shadows and highlights. Shadows, highlights. Let's increase the shadows a lot. Decrease the highlights. Make the shadows brighter and the highlights less bright, or the other way around. Playing around with it, we can achieve a lot of cool effects. So let's move on to filters and brushes. We're gonna talk about all sorts of filters and brushes which distort and which we can use for distorting and applying other special effects to our image. So let's go back to Gimp, and we're gonna go to filters and have a look at all the filters. While we're here, blur. We can use, for example, a Gaussian blur. Don't worry about the details of what Gaussian means. We just pick Gaussian because it's the most famous. And as you can see, as we change the size of the blur, it gets more blurred. And that's all. If we find the right amount of blur, we click on OK. Also very useful to know if we only want to blur part of the face, like for example, She's in the witness protection program, and I only want to blur the face. We can just use the selection tool, and then we can go to filters, blur, Gaussian blur. So now the mafia would definitely not be able to recognize her like this, right? That should be okay. Okay. We also have sharpen, which is actually the opposite of blur. It finds the edges in the picture and increases, highlights the edges. So as you can see, it makes it a lot more crisp. If we set it to maximum, it looks like really weird. Yeah. And then we have distorts. All sorts of distorts are available over here. Ripple. Noise. Oh, excuse me. Waves. It's fun to play around with them because many of these are really cool. Emboss. A lot of them have different parameters. Curve bend, where we can define a curve and it bends along this curve. Wind. Whoosh. Okay. Let's see. We also have what else do we have in the checklist? Distort we've done, blur we've done, sharpen we've done, and we also have red eye removal. So in order to demonstrate red eye removal, I actually have downloaded a picture of somebody with red eyes. You know, when the flash settings are wrong in your picture, it sometimes shows, people show up with red eyes, and it's not very pretty. So now I've imported this picture with red eye. If we want to remove it, we just simply go to filter. Where was it again? I think it's on the colors. Hold on, I'm going to pause it before I waste too much of your time. Okay, there it is. Filters, enhance, red eye removal. And as you can see, it automatically removes the red eyes. And as we increase the threshold, we see it removes the red eye. But if we increase the threshold by too much, it's also going to remove the red from her face. So let's say the red from her face is a bit more than the red from her eyes, and we can't find the right threshold value. In this case, there's a little trick. We can just use the circular selection tool and just select only the eye. And then we're going to go to add to selection, and we're going to select the other iris, and then we're going to go to filters. Where was it? Enhance red eye removal. And then we can set it as high as we want, and it only affects this part which we have selected. Okay, so let's have a look. I think from a point of view of filters, that's all. But we also have brushes which can do some of these. So let's first have a look at the distort brush. Control Shift A. So up here we have a bunch of brushes, like the clone tool. Now let's look at the distort brush first. We have a smudge brush. A smudge is like, just imagine it's wet paint and you just take your finger and you just smudge. We also have a blur brush. We can change the settings of the blur brush down here. And once we go over a space multiple times, we can create a blur. Right now we're on, let's see. Right now we're on sharpen. So let's put it on blur and blur this. Let's blur this. The blurring effect is very subtle. But if you go over it often enough, it gets more and more blurred. Yeah. As you can see, blurring it a little bit is good because it gets rid of this grain in the picture, unless of course you want the grain. Anyway, if you want the grain back, we can just press Ctrl Z, of course, but we can also demonstrate the sharpen tool. When we use the sharpen tool, it's going to increase the amount of grain. It's basically doing the same thing as the filter did, but in a very but you're using a brush instead of the filter. We also have dodge and burn. That darkens it when it's on burn, or if it's on dodge, it lightens it. We also have the clone tool. The clone tool takes part of the, let's increase the size. It takes part of the background. So we have to press Control, or part of anywhere you want. Let's press Control. Let's take her face and hold down Control and click. And this is where we're gonna paint from. And we're gonna paint it over here. And as we click and drag, we're cloning this part of the image up here, which is actually very useful, not when we want to duplicate a face, but it's actually very useful when we want to erase somebody from a picture. So I'm going to clone this part, I'm going to clone this, and I'm going to just erase her from the picture. The clone tool has a very hard edge, but something better than the clone tool from the point of erasing people is healing. Because healing is basically the same thing, but it has a very soft edge, and it doesn't actually cover. It doesn't really cover her, but it kind of blurs it together. So what you might want to do if you want to erase her, let's just erase only her head and make her a headless woman. We're going to use the clone tool first. And we don't mind about these hard edges for now. And then we're going to use the healing tool to get rid of the hard edges. And that's a pretty good job. I mean, I did a very bad job, but it was very quick. So if you take a bit more time and a bit more careful, you can easily make it really look seamless. Like here, I need to make some corrections and here, but you know, you need to practice with it. So do past papers and you will get some practice using this clone and healing tool. Okay. That's this clone, blur, smudge, sharpen, red eye removal. Erase is very easy. We go to our eraser tool. Don't forget, we need to make sure that alpha channel has been added. If there's no alpha channel, we won't be able to erase. Let's remove the alpha channel and let's erase, and you can just see we have a white background. So let's Control Z that. If we need transparency, make sure alpha has been added to this layer. Okay, so the last thing we have is distort using a brush. We can use the warp tool for that. It's up here, warp tool, and we have a bunch of different things we can do. So up here we choose the type of warp. For example, I want to grow the area. Then I'm going to increase the size of her eyes like this. It looks so scary. And we can shrink the area too. She looks ridiculous. It's funny. And we can swirl clockwise or counterclockwise. Remember, we can always increase the size of the brush here, etc. And now she looks pretty funny like this. Remember, never use this stuff to make fun of people. Only if you're all laughing together, then it's pretty funny. But if you're making somebody feel bad, you're probably in the wrong. If you feel you've gone too far and somebody is crying, then we can always go here to erase warping, and we can use our erase warping brush to remove all the warping that we've applied so far and put it back to normal. Okay. Distort. Now we've got color depth and resolution. This is under image properties. We go up here, image properties, and we can see that we can change the mode, RGB grayscale, to make it black and white, or we can go to indexed, and then we can limit the number of colors in our image to, for example, 7 colors. And it looks quite interesting, like that. What we can also do is go to precision, and right now we're on 8-bit color depth, but if we feel it's not enough, we can increase the number of bits we're using to identify the color. Furthermore, we can go to canvas size, and we can change the pixel width and height of the canvas. So let's decrease the canvas width, and let's increase the height, and let's click on resize. And now the canvas has changed size, but all the layers are still the same as they were before. So we can go here and we can say scale the image, and we can scale it to the same as what we said before, if we remember, which I actually don't remember, but we could easily look it up, right? But I'll just demonstrate like this, and that scales the image. If we need to know the exact width and height we want to scale it to, we can just copy and paste these values. Let's do it. Control C. I'm going to just remember 4779. 4779. Oh, I forgot to unlock the ratio. Okay, so that should work. But we need to move it as well. But we'll just use the align tool. Oh, something is still wrong. Ah, there we go. And now it fits perfectly. Okay, let's see. We could also, let's just Control Z, Z, Z. Set the layer to the resolution we want, and then we could just go to Image, Fit Canvas to Layers, and that would also work. So that's how we can change the color depth and the resolution. And next, we're gonna move on to these mask. In order to add a mask, we're just gonna go to our layer and we're gonna right click, Add Mask. And we're gonna start with a fully white mask, which means that we're gonna be able to see the entire image. Now let's right click again and we're going to go to Show the Layer Mask and make sure that Edit Layer Mask is also enabled. And we're gonna take our brush tool and we're gonna set the foreground color to black. Where's our brush tool? And we're going to color this in. In fact, I'm gonna take a soft brush rather. To make the edges blurry. And now the part which is white will be opaque and the part which is black will be transparent. So we're gonna go right and we're going to remove the mask. So we're really just deleting part of the picture. Also the hole we're cutting in has blurry edges. So we can easily just paint on this paint on the mask like this. And in fact, it doesn't make sense what I'm doing. So let's go back to Show Layer Mask. And we want to go to Image. And we want to invert the colors. How do we do that? Colors, invert. So now this part will be transparent and only her face will be visible. So let's see, like this, right? And now we can put like flowers in the background or whatever. You know, some really beautiful picture. So if we want to do that, let's just do it quickly just to show you. Layer 1. Background, and I'm just going to download some flower pictures. Like this or something. Really beautiful. Let's pick something from the public domain. And then we're just going to drag and drop it. Here. Put it in the background. We can delete this. And scale up our image. Make sure we have the right layer selected. Let's scale it up. Just rotate it. Move it. No, let's not rotate it. It looks stupid. Like this. I think you get the image. And now we're gonna go to crop to content. No. We're gonna go, this is why I love Control Z, fit canvas to layers. But we have to decrease the size of this layer. So we're gonna go to layer, crop to content. You see the mask, okay. We need to get rid of this mask. So we're going to apply the layer mask. And now we can crop the content. And now we can resize this. And now we're going to enter to apply. And now we're going to go to image, crop the content. And here we have it. Beautiful, right? Okay. I did a very quick and dirty job, but if you're a bit more careful, you can do a much better job than me, and it looks good. In fact, I'm going to show you one more application. It's too bright in the background compared to her face. So we're going to go to this layer, and we're going to apply the filter. A color filter, we're going to make the saturation much less. And we also want to make it a bit darker. Brightness. Very nice. Okay, I think you get the picture. So we can use mask to apply this subtract, by the way. Excuse me. Yeah, we can use mask to apply this intersect. In fact, let's just put these on different things. And let's start a new image. And let's say we have two shapes. Let's say we have this shape. And we'll fill it in black. And we have another shape. Like this. And we're going to fill it in red. And if we want to join these two layers, all we do is go like this. Right click, merge down. That joins these two shapes together. And the two shapes are merged into one. So that covers join. Add. Add is basically the same. So we're adding one layer to another. So we're adding this shape to this shape. Subtract. So we want to take the rectangle and subtract it from the circle. In this case, we can change the mode to erase. And this is going to this rectangle is going to erase, this layer is going to erase whatever is overlapping from this layer. Then we can group them together. So that it doesn't affect the other layers. So let's say we had a green triangle. Here we have a green triangle, and we want it also to get cut out, subtracted. We also want the red rectangle to erase this part. We put them in the same layer. But if we want the green triangle not to be affected, we just put it in the layer below, not in the same group. That's subtract. So let's say we want an intersection let's say we want where the red rectangle intersects. We want where the red rectangle, let's put it back. Where the red rectangle intersects with the green triangle. We just move it over there. And we want the intersection. For this, we're going to use a layer. Excuse me. For this, we're going to use a mask. And we're going to add a mask to the bottom layer. And we're going to start with a fully transparent mask. In other words, it's going to delete everything. Okay. And then we're going to take our top layer. And we're going to just, because the layer is over here, in fact, let's just Control C and then select our layer, and we're going to Control V, and then we're going to Control V again. And as you can see, it shows up over here. That's because the whole layer has moved. Here's our layer boundary lines. We're going to change that layer boundary size to image size to move the boundary, and now we're going to copy paste. Control C, select the mask, Control V, and let's Control V again to put it in the mask, and we're going to hide the original layer, and this floating layer we can delete now. As you can see though, the intersection doesn't really work because it's partially transparent. That's because it's red. We have to go to Show Layer Mask, and as you can see, red translates to light green, and we want to convert this into fully white, to be fully opaque. So the green triangle at this region will be fully opaque. We'll go to the brush tool, and we go to what? It's kind of and then we can apply the mask. It's kind of a very convoluted way to apply an intersection, I know. But so it's probably better, because in Inkscape it's much easier, probably better to apply the intersection in Inkscape and then export it to PNG and then re-import it to Gimp if you need to. But that covers this section. We also have clip. Clip is actually the same thing as intersection. We just use a mask to create a clip. In other words, this is the clipping shape, and everything underneath the clipping shape shows up, and everything out of it just kind of disappears. Right? Clip. And that covers the whole syllabus, except for these two things. So it's best just to do it in Inkscape if it comes up. Okay, so thanks for watching. I hope this was useful. Don't forget, this is just going over everything we need to know very quickly, and it's one thing to know in theory how to do it, and it's a completely another thing to be able to do it in practice. So in order to practice, my recommendation to you is to practice as many past papers as possible. So have a good one. Good luck on your exam. See you next time. Bye bye.